This SOFA Summit session is options for upgrading. Those are on older versions of Nav, older versions of even Business Central these days. Where are we? And just a discussion through the principles of what we need to think about to get onto the nice shiny new stuff that you've perhaps seen in other sessions today. So let's just do that. So I'm sure you've seen all of these. Actually, a 60-minute session, this one, I believe, unless Sam tells me otherwise. My name's James Krauser. I've one of the directors of TechMan, been here for too long, and been heavily involved in a lot of client journeys over that period, and just recently a lot of client journeys up to Business Central. So hopefully going to be able to impart some words, if not wisdom, then at least give you some pointers in the right direction. So what we'll cover, approach, the all-important extensions. We might go and have a look at just how those work to install and uninstall, and how they're layered on top of each other in Business Central, so that rather than changing the core of the package, we're changing on the top. That's enforced a move from the traditional development environment, the language that we worked in, our home ground, if you like, from a language called CAL to now application language. It's not changed a massive amount, but it has changed a little bit. And more importantly, to be able to upgrade you, we need to do that conversion. We'll then talk about migrating your data, because that's harder than it seems, licensing, and then a Q&A. So the first thing that you have to decide is how you're going to approach this. Business Central's been around, I think, 3 years now. Officially, certainly, we've been talking about it for slightly longer than that. It's Nav by another name. It's Navision. It is just the latest version. It's just Microsoft's marketing team have got involved, as they unfortunately do, and it had to fit into the Dynamics 365 family. And if I told you the rumors of how much they spent coming up with the Business Central name, you would think it was obscene. You can imagine a US corporate, what they did to go into finding a new name and then finding whether it was available in every country in the world and all the rest of it. But it is effectively now. So, what we're actually facing here is not a new product, but it is a technology shift. So those that were in the introduction to Business Central scheme this morning, you'll have got a little bit of a view that it's now web browser based instead of Windows client based, that effectively the background has moved on with this. And really, we've got to migrate from the Nav, quite a number of older Nav versions. So there's not many clients now that are still left on the classic client, as we call it, the 2009 and previous client, but there's an awful lot now on the mid decade of 2013, 2013 R2, 2015, 16, 17 and 18. And there's different nuances between those different versions. The further you are back, the more I would say perhaps the value of thinking about a revolution versus an evolution. And what I mean by that is a re-implementation. That in effect is starting with a fresh copy of Business Central and migrating the data that you want, that you need to take across, rather than taking across, running an upgrade process which migrates that data. Now, if we have to take you, for argument's sake, from 2013 R2, we have to run the process to move that to 2015, then 2016, then 2017, and so on and through. And the more processes we run to migrate that data, I have to say, the more chances are that something's going to end up not quite as you would ideally like it. The other factor is a lot of history is going to come across. So that customer that you stopped dealing with in 2014 is still going to exist in your bright, shiny new Business Central instance. So, you know, that you've got a process you really are going to clean that up, or just putting up with it being there. And I'll discuss a little bit later about why you probably shouldn't do that, or you can start. So the first tip is go look at configuration packages. So for those of you who implemented a long time ago, and even those mid-decade, you may have used configuration packages. They have been around since kind of the 2013 era, but typical Microsoft, you know, it took them a number of years to get them really good and really useful. And now they really do perform well. So we see a lot more chance of just being able to put that configuration package into your current system, export your customers, your vendors, your payment methods. We can look at each table of information that's got balances in it, put it into that configuration package, export it, and then bring it in to a fresh, shiny new version and start you from scratch. And that's often a good way of kind of getting you going very quickly, a lot quicker than a start from scratch on fresh, shiny new software. The other thing I'd urge you to think a little bit about doing that is point 4. You know, a lot of people say, oh, my history, I need to refer. Actually, when we look at different tables, you've got some tables. I've seen customers with hundreds of thousands of, for instance, warehouse entries, even ledger entries, going back years, never reported on. You know, only there because actually we don't know what will happen if we delete them. And so this is an opportunity to draw a line under that and start again. We do tend to have the question of, you know, how do we access if we need to return to that history? Well, clearly all your opening orders and outstanding transactions are going to need to come across. That's fine, we can load those across, but not bringing all that history probably fills you now on the call with shock and horror. But I promise you, it will be, you know, the first couple of months, it will be painful, but it will get progressively less. And what we tend to find is after 6 months to a year, we find clients who've done that say, actually, it's a really good thing to do because they end up with that nice, clean system that's as they want. They get the opportunity to tweak those things that were right 20 years ago when they first started with Nav, but are not right now, you know, not really driving the business as it needs to be. So the other option that gives is, you know, we talk about software as a service, the online version where you don't have servers. You can, with this method, you can go direct to SaaS. We're starting up as new. The plus is that, you know, you don't have to learn a whole new system. All the posting groups, all the dimensions, all the payment terms, the way you block records, bins, warehouses, sales orders, all work the same way. So you don't have that big education process as if you were moving to a completely new system. It really is an upgrade from an educational point of view, from a training aspect point of view. It's just not an upgrade from a data point of view. So I'd ask you to think about Revolution. You're going on to SaaS and getting straight onto that, then Microsoft will do that upgrade process each month, at least each month. And we've been doing that for 18 months, nearly 2 years now. So we've got a lot of experience of going through. It sounds a very scary thing to do. And you know, there's certainly aspects of it, things that you need to do. It's not a complete freebie. You do have some responsibilities, and we have some responsibilities that have changed. It's not bad. It's just different, I would say, in that respect. And you know, 18 months in, guess what? We've now learned our way around those processes, so we can guide you through that and make sure that there's no gotchas in there that inevitably you get when something is brand spanking. So okay, we're not going for revolution. We're not starting again from scratch. So what should we do instead? How should we think about it? And the first thing that we mentally do, and I'd encourage you to do it, is it's a game of two halves. Okay, you've got two aspects to making your shiny new upgraded system. You've got the functionality. Now, in previous upgrades, that functionality really, we've just taken any customizations, any changes to your core system, any third-party ISV solutions, Jet, Continia, Sana, all the different ones out there that come up time and time again. We've gone off to those organizations, got the latest version of their software, put it together, and then re-implemented your customizations through into those upgrades. And anybody who's been through, often customers have been through 5 or 6, 2 or 3 is certainly normal. Quite a few of those upgrades, right from kind of Navision 1 all the way through. We've got customers that have jumped. You'll know that when those upgrades go through, you have to check very carefully to make sure we found it everywhere that we've made a change. And that's because the old way of changing things was to take the software that came from Microsoft and change it for what you wanted. So if we, for argument's sake, added some fields to the item table or the customer table or the sales line, in effect, we had to go and change those. And just to give you an example, you change a sales line, there's actually 6 other tables that a sales line gets posted to. So posted sales shipment, sales invoice, sales credit memo, sales archive, etc., that in effect you should really go and make those changes to as well. And when we come to upgrade, we have to go find all those changes, identify them, and re-implement them on that new version that comes from Microsoft. And that was the historic way of doing upgrades for functional purposes. So you really outsourced the problem to us. We ran routines that did comparisons, a bit like comparing one Word document with another, and usually came up with a fairly comprehensive list. But there are, I'll be the first to admit to say that the tools have failed on occasion, and you've come back to us in the testing phase and said, this is missing, that's not working, especially when Microsoft have changed. That's the difference between that comparison. It wasn't a straight comparison. You were comparing what Microsoft did originally with what they did on the new upgraded version. And there were obviously changes as part of that upgrade. So you were trying to kind of navigate your way through that. Business Central is different. We cannot change the software that comes from Microsoft. Okay, that is set. What we do is we extend it. So that software has a lot of things called events. And I did toy with the idea of showing you what an event looked like, but it's a piece of code. So I've resisted. It's after lunch. I don't want to put you all completely to sleep. So I've resisted that temptation and tried to keep this higher level. But an event is just a hook, okay? And it's where the core application software says, okay, I'm at this point now. James, do you want me to do anything different from what I was doing? Do you want me to do anything else from what I was doing? And that event, that hook, can display that extra field on the page, do a different calculation, add another posting to the whole process, do whatever your customizations could do. There's a theory when hooks events first came along in kind of 2018. Well, they came along in 2016 and matured in 2017 and really became really useful in Navision 2018. So if you've got now 2018 or 17, probably chances are some of the customizations we may have done for you are based on events. They are much easier then to translate because they're already based on those events. Can we do everything that via those hooks, via those events, that we could do changing the core code? And the answer is no. But it's been a long time since I found something I couldn't do, albeit on occasion in a slightly different way. So sometimes when we're migrating your 2013, 2015, 2016 customizations to the new extension way of doing it, we have to say to you, well, it's not going to work identically to the way it worked before, but it achieves the same result. And it's been a long time since we've had to give up and say, actually, we can't do this via an event. Certainly when we got to 14, release 14 of BC, where does that stand? Well, release 14 came out in 2020, the spring of 2020. We now get 2 releases every year. So they've moved to a version number because they can't call it a year number because we get 2 of them, spring and October. But there is some work to do to move to extensions. And in the future, the spring 2020 release is the last one where we have the traditional method. We can go and make those traditional changes. So that's what we call Business Central 14, spring release wave 1, different terms, 2020 wave 1, 2020 spring release, some people call it, but that's the last one. We're finding a lot of clients are upgrading to that version, even though it's now a few versions old. We're currently on BC 16, which is spring 2020. Spring 2020. I was wrong, wasn't I? It's 2019 was BC 14. My apologies. So why would you upgrade to an older version? Because that's certainly not what we've done. Well, BC 14 has as many events and as much extensibility. We have the capability to do a lot of those changes into extensions, and it's kind of a hybrid way of doing it. And we'll talk a little bit about that doing that a little bit later. It supports both the traditional method of customizations and the new ones. So it's kind of the bridging version for people to go to while they convert to the new way of doing things, maybe over a few years, and then effectively they can upgrade much quicker. So extensions, again, once we are on those layers, we are not embedding in the core. In effect, we can upgrade. Shown most by SaaS. I've already talked about the fact that Microsoft are delivering a new version of Business Central every month. And they're not going to spend hours upgrading for you. The stats say that the upgrade process for an online version of Business Central take approximately 7 seconds to run, which is an amazing story for those of you who've spent days, weeks on upgrade projects in the past. So what they typically do is take off the custom extensions that you've added on the top, upgrade the base extension, which is now the base application, the general ledger, the sales ledger, all of that is an extension itself. And then they put your extensions back on, and providing that all works, they then effectively take away the old version. So they run the process in parallel and then delete the old version, and you don't notice that it's upgraded. And that happens, 16.3, the cumulative release that some of you again have talked to our support team who said, you need a cumulative release. That's going to be a few days work to implement. That went in on Thursday, Friday last week for a lot of UK customers who are on the SaaS version. So much easier and much more straightforward. The other half of upgrading is data. And believe it or not, data is causing us more pain to migrate than the functionality. And why is that? Well, it's this. It's the way extensions work. Okay, so anything that you add within an extension, it's almost like a pyramid scheme of it's only available. It can only visible, within that extension. So if we make a change to the customer table, we add a few fields to that. Let's use that example again. And we do that in an extension. It's only that extension that's can see. And that's why, why is it that way? Why on earth would they make it that way? Well, the reason it's that way is we can uninstall that extension. and nothing, and then everything else forgets about it. The core application is not going to get stopped because of that extension, because it doesn't even really know it's there. What you can do is enable, so extensions can see other extensions, is make them what we call dependent. Now, if I have extension B, which is dependent on extension A, which is then dependent on the core application, pretty much everything's going to be dependent on the core application. If I want to replace or upgrade extension A, I have to uninstall B, uninstall A, upgrade A, put B back. Okay, so you don't want to make extensions dependent any more than you need to. And what we try and do in your system design when we're talking about how we structure customizations to your new Business Central system is we're trying to put as many small extensions in there as possible that are not dependent on anything else, because that means we don't need to touch them. Okay, when you have a change, we can just make a change to that one small area and we know the scope. We don't need to test the system then end to end. Okay, we just need to test the little bit of the system that we know that extension is fixed. So it's a bit, you're plugging in to particular areas of the application. And because you have the golden ticket of an uninstall, an uninstall takes it out, and part of the Microsoft criteria for extensions is when they uninstall, you shouldn't be able to tell that they've been installed at all. So they have to have a clean uninstall. And that means if something goes wrong or is causing an issue or whatever, you can take it out very easily. Obviously, then the consequence of the business process. So you do need some risk management to say, can we still process orders, etc., the way that we need to? Is it a nice to have? You can afford to do that now because it's not a core expensive change, or is it a must have, in which case we've got to be a bit more sensible with it. And because they uninstall the extensions when they upgrade them and reinstall them afterwards, the data moves out. So the data is copied out to a holding area and then put back in. What it does mean is you've got data in your current system in the traditional custom CAL tables. So we may have extended, for instance, item ledger entries or sales lines again, invoices, I've got lots of extra custom fields on. If we want to move those to an extension, the first time when we're moving it from a custom table field to an extension, we have to copy it off somewhere, delete the original field, put it in via the extension, and then copy it back. And that's a pain of a process that's not, can take a long time, particularly if it's item ledger entries or something like that, where you've got millions of records, because it has to process that field by field. So that is going to take a lot of time and therefore, and a lot of care. And therefore, unfortunately, with time and care comes cost. There is also the fact that because we're using events, we're using these hooks to kind of grab into the core system and intercept the logic where we want it to change, we might not be able to do it exactly the way it's been done in a traditional customization. Now, that's not wrong, and actually for new transactions, you probably will notice very little difference. But it can mean that the data underneath, the data that we need, needs to be different. So we've then got to write conversion routines that in effect update those historic transactions so they match the new ones you're now putting through the core system. 14 to 15, there is a process to go through, because the base application, the general ledger, sales ledger, purchase ledger that I talked about, order processing, where WMS, manufacturing, that all moves. In 14, it's still CAL objects that you perhaps, you've probably looked over somebody's shoulder at least and seen the object designer if you haven't uploaded a set of objects directly. That's no longer there with 15 and 16 now. So in effect, that's disappeared from last October, and the whole of the application is an extension. It's the base extension, or application as we call it. So we have to migrate your data from the traditional custom tables into that base application table. Microsoft have given us a routine for that, and it's a one-for-one. So it is a relatively, we don't have to work out the logic of that, which can be the time-consuming process. So secondary is that we're finding a lot of, as part of the upgrade process, a lot of customers have an understandable, much stronger desire to say, can I use a standard solution that's out there for credit control or e-commerce or whatever it is? So rather than, back in, I don't know, when you started your Business Central nav system, there wasn't the off-the-shelf availability. Those of you who've been and looked at www.appsource.com and seen the Business Central extensions in there, there's 750 odd plus now in that marketplace, and actually there's more out there that are going into that marketplace that we're aware of, all of variable quality, some of them competing with each other and all that. But you may well decide to move to one of those, and in which case, do we just scrap your historic data from that customization that filled that gap, or do we try and make that data go into that standard customization then, and there's some work to do then? So suddenly you can start to see why I said originally revolution rather than evolution, because actually, evolution sounds the easier option, but actually doesn't work out that way and can be along the harder road for your entire organization rather than the revolution road of a fresh implementation. So I think the most common process for upgrading that we're seeing, most people who've used Nav for a few years have done the right thing, and it's absolutely core to their business. It's what I call the engine of the business. Without it, everything stops. And so the trauma of a re-implementation or a big upgrade is something that I might even use the word scare. It's a strong word, but it certainly worries. People look at the cost and so on and go, wow, when are we going to find the time to do that, let alone the money in the current climate? But times do move on, and people generally, when they look at things like Business Central 16 that maybe you saw this morning, there's some aspects to that and you go, oh, I wish we had. Now, paying to customize those new features back into the historic version doesn't make any sort of sense at all. And so normally people are that builds up a head of steam, and people eventually go, okay, we need to think about upgrading. And hopefully one of the reasons you're on this session is that you are having those thoughts right now. And so, for the first time ever in 25 years odd of dealing with first Nav and now Business Central, part of the strategy that we're coming up to, we always used to upgrade to the latest release. And even sometimes the one that wasn't even out yet, because by the time you were using it, by the time we'd gone through the testing process and so on, it would be out and therefore released, and you didn't want to be behind, particularly when Microsoft moved to the annual releases. You didn't want to be behind by the time you got it in already. But for the first time, a lot of clients are choosing to move to BC 14. And that's because we can do one last traditional upgrade to BC 14 and you can carry on using it. BC 14 is the last one that allows the Windows client. So, but it has a web client which is usable. It's a lot better. Those of you who tried the web client back in 2013, 2015, 2016, you'll know that there was a lot missing in the web client. Well, 14 I wouldn't say it's all there. You probably need 16 for that. Now I would contend on 16, I would match you to the Windows client blow for blow in terms of functionality and more. But in 14, it's there and it's certainly usable. And so what we need to do is persuade people to use it. And so quite often, that's an option at 14 to take a group of people, a functional area of the business at a time, off the web client and across to the Windows. And generally it's the admin, maybe yourselves as responsible for Business Central, and maybe core finance that end up with the Windows client last of all. And then eventually we say, well, we need to go to 15 or 16 now and take that away. But we avoid that kind of huge trauma of the whole business changing together. And that's probably the theme of going to 14 in order to upgrade. Of Microsoft have recognized that BC 14 will be around for a few more years. So, their support life cycle is longer for 14. They will support it into the future. So things like regulatory changes, the updates for making tax digital, group VAT and all of that will come for longer for 14 than 15. Now, that sounds illogical. Why would they support 14 and not 15 or 16? Well, actually, they say that once you get to 15 or 16, your upgrade process is really simple and a few minutes, stroke hours to organise, and therefore people shouldn't stick on 15 to 16. But because of the need to move from standard, the old type customizations to the new ones, they know, and also the fact that some ISVs haven't come up with the equivalent new extension way of implementing yet, they know that 14 will be around for a lot longer. What we can do with 14 is, and what our account management team are doing with a lot of clients is, when the client rings up and says, I've got a change request, I need another change, I need my invoice layout adjusting slightly. What they're doing, I know an invoice layout, if it's customized for you, it's not out the box, that is a customization. That's probably the most common one and the simplest one to do. We're taking that opportunity to move that into an extension. Now that takes a little bit longer. In the case of an invoice, it's minutes longer to move that away, delete the original CAL object and put that in as an extension, and you won't tell the difference from using the client. But that's tick one in our checklist then of moving across. Sometimes you've got an area which has been customized quite heavily. So maybe your, I don't know, something like your sales pricing has been customized and so on. So sometimes that's look at that and go, well, hold on, there is a standard solution for that now. So we have one called promotional pricing. So a lot of what we when we sat down with the new extensions, we went, let's draw on our years of experience of different clients asking us different things, and let's build it once and build it to a standard extension, put it into AppSource, and then effectively you can plug that in and it will do those 2-for-1 promotions or different discounts if you get to quantities across multiple lines and all those sorts of things. So it may be that you move to that. We can plug that in at 14. You can start to use that. And again, we can go and take away that original long-term, decade-old customization maybe and move that out. And it's really about, dare I say, cleaning up the underlying CLR objects, one area, one functional area at a time, until we get to a situation where you've got no CAL modifications left, everything is extensions. And the good news is at that point, then the upgrade to 16 is a few minutes, stroke hours to run through. It's probably going to be hours because you're going to want to run through and test that it all works. We spend far longer in the new world testing than we do actually running the process. Our development process, once your extensions, the developers often don't have to get involved at all. It's a process where platform people can just run that process and move that across. So you're spreading the change over. We call it the hybrid model because you're spreading that change to extensions over a number of months stroke years. And ideally we'll map out a roadmap of that, but we understand that the business demands change, and that sometimes it'll be, right, in light of COVID, we've got to do this, therefore that's the area we're going to change, so therefore we'll go and do it. One other little thing that I'll think to mention is when we move to the AL extensions. I can't see your hands. Nobody's got the camera on, but I bet if I asked you to put your hands up, if I asked the question, who likes testing? Who enjoys testing? Our project managers have, their most difficult thing is to get clients to say, yes, I've tested. I'm happy it works. Everybody's slightly unsure. I get that completely. So one of the other options we've had is to build automatic tests. We now have a library of functions that we can call that go create a sales order and post it and check that the GL balance moves by this much, and that this field is added to the item ledger entry, and this posts to this completely custom area over here. And that means that when the new updates come out, if you get to SaaS, it's almost mandatory, because it's those automated tests that we run once a month on what Microsoft are going to deploy that's coming, without you needing to actually run through. Because how do you run a full traditional test plan on a monthly basis? You wouldn't do much else, I think I'm right in saying. So that's something to factor in. And for perhaps areas that are critical, because we're dividing up extensions into lots of small bits, you can, something that's a nice to have, you can say, oh, let's not do a test for that, because if it goes wrong, I'll just uninstall it and we'll do the workaround. But that has to work, therefore I need a test. I need to make sure that works already. So consider adding tests when we move across. Historic data. On the SaaS model, Microsoft has introduced a limit. Well, it's not a limit, but it's you get included in the core subscription 80 gig. And that 80 gig has to cover your test and live situation. We see clients which have got 100 times that in one instance, but 10 times is not an exaggeration. And that's sales invoices that go back 25 years. To when NAV was first implemented. And there's never been kind of, when it's been on premise, you've just slapped another disk in. Storage has been cheap. And that's been my advice to clients in the past. Now, in terms of getting there, we do see things like inventory valuation reports, debtor reports, and so on, that are slowed down, because sometimes 50, depending on the business model, something like 50% of the customers can be blocked because they're obsolete accounts. And so therefore there is a process of either identifying those and cleaning them up. Anything that's over 18 months, that's over a closed year behind, we can set up to go and delete in Business Central. You need to know what you're doing, clearly. Deleting data, where's the risk there? Yeah, of course there is. But it's something that not many NAV customers have spent time doing. It is something that if you're going to migrate to SaaS, you need to think about, if you're not going the re-implementation model, of doing that cleanup. Again, it comes back to re-implementation, starts making that a lot easier. But work that out. It's, as I say, it's not unusual to see sales order tables that have got every completed historic sales order in there for the last 10 years, and nobody actually goes back, and everybody has to filter down, and they know how to find their way around it, but it doesn't need to be there. It's not good practice. Data migration to SaaS. So those of you who are thinking to go into the online version, there is a cloud migration tool, as it's called, built in. What it requires is that we build up an identical copy on premise, I say an identical copy. It can be back to NAV 2018 now. They've introduced older versions, but that has to be clean. No cal customizations. Do you think, is there a theme coming through this afternoon about, the historic modifications need to go, and then in effect, we have to set up the same extensions, same customizations in the cloud model as we do on premise, as we have in your on-premise system, and we can then set it up so that each table is synced between the local copy and the remote copy. And that will go through, it takes a few hours, as you would expect, to pass it up record by record. The data volume needs to be limited. You've got that 80 gig limit, but it's sensible not to migrate more than you need. You have no access to some of the tools on SaaS. Certainly you have no access to SQL and so on. So tidying up on SaaS is actually more difficult than tidying up when it's on premise, because we can just go and delete if we need to. When Microsoft, each gig over that 80 gig, you pay for each gig, and that does mount up. They really don't want more than 80 gigs at point of process. So typically what we'll do is we'll do a test migration. So we'll kick that off. Friday night, as you would expect, is probably the most popular. It runs over the weekend. You come in Monday, you keep using your on-premise copy, but you've got your cloud instance with all the data as at Friday night for you to go and play with and try and test out. And then we wipe that down. And when you're happy that everything is as it should be, we run the process and stop transacting on your on-premise. Your on-premise doesn't disappear. You might set it down if it is on Azure or hosted now. You might reduce it to just 1 or 2 users, so the costs go right down, but it's still there. But you carry on using the SaaS version then, and that's when you have to start learning kind of the monthly upgrade process and how to manage what you need to do to manage that through. Licensing, for those of you on older versions pre-Business Central, Business Central is per user rather than concurrent. You get 3 users as a replacement for each one that you had on concurrent. So rather than being able to log in up to 20 people, you will get 60 people that you can name that can access the system. And they can access the system however they want to, via the web browser, via their phone, via their tablet, via a handheld device if you use barcode devices and so on and so on. They can log in as many times as you want to. There's not that restriction. There are essential and premium versions. So the premium version is different. So Microsoft have determined that premium is anybody with any of the manufacturing or service management, so service engineering bits of Business Central. Things like the WMS, all the warehouse management pieces are in the Essentials version. There is a difference in subscription between Essential and Premium. I'm not going to quote prices on this because we'll probably stick this on YouTube and everybody would know the pricing, and that will go out of date probably at some point. So I'd rather you contact your account manager if you want to know specific pounds per month pricing. Your traditional license can come up to BC and can stick on BC, and we can pay your annual maintenance fee exactly the same way as we've always used to for there. You don't get a SaaS instance. You don't get the SaaS version to use if you do, if you continue on that what we call DPL BREP pricing, annual pricing. But you would get if you have any granule that's part of manufacturing or service management, you would get the premium version of Business Central, so all of that functionality. And there's only the 2 levels now, so there's no granules you don't get if your instance goes back that far. If you then choose to move to the SaaS version, Microsoft will give you 40% off the published subscription price for Business Central, and that provides, you don't need SQL Server, you don't need a server. Everything's included in that. In terms of it needed, the only thing you're looking for is support from a partner like ourselves. So you continue paying that subscription, 60% of the normal subscription, and stop paying your annual BREP. However, for the next 3 years, I wouldn't do that, because for the next 3 years, to encourage customers to use the SaaS, what they're doing is for the next 12 months, from the beginning of June round to the end of June next year, you can choose to go to what's called a BREP to enhancement plan offer. This means that instead of an annual payment for your BREP, you would pay monthly. So it's exactly the same amount per annum, it's just broken down into a payment each month. So typically the first of the month, if you do it through us, we do ask for that payment via direct debit, because we're having to collect 12 payments for the cost of for the same as one. What you also get as part of that BREP to EP offer is you get a SaaS cloud instance. So you would get an instance of the latest copy of Business Central for you to use. Whether you choose to use it is a question, but you get that in there. Now that offer is a 3-year offer. It means that you can go to SaaS for no more than you are paying in maintenance now. So yes, you've got the cost of kind of probably our work to maybe re-engineer your customizations into extensions and to get your data where it needs to be. But in effect, it's going to cost you then to run it the same, and you lose the cost of your servers, and paying for that aspect of it. So quite a reasonable incentive to get you to think about going for it. If you're going the BREP to EP offer, that is, you can only take that up in the next year. You don't have to migrate to SaaS in the next year. So we could do that BREP to EP offer, keep you on your current version, move you to BC 14 next year, and then the following year maybe move you to SaaS, or the year after that. When that offer ends, when that 3-year period ends, you will be able to go back to the BREP that you pay today, or you'll be able to go, if you've migrated to SaaS, the BREP that you pay today doesn't include a SaaS instance, remember? So if you do use that 3-year period to migrate to SaaS, you would go to the standard subscription price. On the screen it says forever. You notice I put a star by that. Microsoft tell us forever, but I'm a cynical Brit, and I think at some point inflation, exchange rates, whatever will kick in, and they'll go, okay, that's that subscription price changes. Can I predict when that will be? No, I'm not deliberately not going to do that. I think that they have somewhere near to 180,000 customers, individual companies running Business Central or Nav, older versions of Nav on premise. People like you who are trying to tempt to upgrade. And if they change that subscription price, having said it's forever, it's set to actually, I think it's set to the end of 2099 on their internal systems. So that's pretty much forever. I'm certainly not going to worry about a price increase when that date comes along. I think that they would send a message to the market. I do not expect that price to change, certainly in the next 5-6 years or so. And I think that's probably all you can ask for in the world of pricing and IT, certainly in my experience. So we will see beyond that where it is. But consider what the licensing changes are. There is it's part 3. I said it was a game of 2 halves. I've come up with extra time, which is the licensing aspect that you need to be aware of that change. We probably won't need to execute licensing changes straight away. Your BREP to EP offer is the exception to that, because that has to be taken up, because that's a one-time offer, that has to be taken up at the next renewal date. So if your renewal is in July or August, I think we've spoken to everybody whose renewal is July or September, then talk to the account management team about whether that's right for you. I don't see why it wouldn't be, in a way, because it's just you're paying 12 payments. I suppose if your BREP is relatively small, you might just choose to process it in one go because it's less hassle. But if it's a larger amount, then split it into 12. It's cash flow, right? And at the moment, that's probably more useful than it has been even before then. So in summary, because we're 22 minutes past and I've got 8 minutes left and I want to leave a little time for questions. Fresh start or migrate? Fresh start, well, it's not really a fresh start. It's really taking your master data out of your current system and pushing it into a new one. So fresh start is a little harsh, but upgrading, the traditional method, that has some hard work to do as well. So just think about which is the better option for you on that. SaaS or on-premise, whether you're going to say on-premise, might not be truly on-premise. I'd probably say almost the majority of customers now are on Azure. So they're on their own private Azure instance instead of the public SaaS instance. So they do have access to the back end. They can control when upgrades go through very tightly. They can turn the knob up for performance. If you're a larger customer, I think that probably makes sense. SaaS is probably the small, medium. The enterprise bit of SME probably does make sense to have on a PaaS, platform as a service instance, so you have more control. If you're migrating, think about going through BC14. Get a copy of it. If your BREP upgrade is paid up, we can provide you with that instance, so you can start to think about that. And one last traditional upgrade cycle to get into 14. We now have, the list is, I was going to say well into double figures. I don't know precisely it is, but 14 is the most common version we have out there because of people using it as that hybrid jumping off point to go to the new extension model. Don't spend more on Cal customizations. The payback on that is going to be short term, unless you're going to say we're going to sweat this and we're not going to upgrade forever. And then I just say something like, making tax digital, or one of my next jobs to do is to read the customs documentation that was released, 208 pages yesterday from the government about what we've got to do for imports and exports post-January. And my chances are that a lot of solutions that kind of perhaps are going to produce the documentation, etc., for that are going to be built for newer versions. And if you want that, that's going to be a much bigger cost in Cal than it is going to be in AL. So this is where it is going to be easier for things like banking integration and so on. We see lots of new things, but people are only doing them for the majority of customers that are AL capable, or new customers. It doesn't make sense to do it for both. Talk to us. Agree a roadmap for migration. Let us know what you're thinking and what you plan to do. Go use standard extensions, off-the-shelf software where you can. Business Central tends to be a platform. They do enhance the base, but they don't add specialist areas to it. But there's an increasing library. Go look at AppSource. It's really fascinating read. Test them before, put them in your sandbox. That's maybe a use for your SaaS instance before you migrate to it, to try things out up on there. You can do that in minutes. Dependent extensions on those standard extensions. If a third-party tool doesn't do exactly what you want, let's just add that 2% rather than build the whole 100% exactly the same way as we've done to the Microsoft-based application for years. Once your extensions only, stay current. So when you're up, if you're running BC15 at the moment, you should be thinking about a 16. Actually, you should probably be thinking about a 17 upgrade that will arrive on October the 1st. We have instances of that, so we can start to look at that. Microsoft give us a new version of that daily, would you believe? So we can literally, it comes out of the development team in Copenhagen and Fargo, North Dakota, and we get to access it the following day, providing it's passed all the automated tests. That's why they don't need to go through a big, long, convoluted testing cycle, because everything is tested overnight. We still have bugs where they haven't written a test yet, but they're up to 24,500 tests. So, it's getting more and more comprehensive, we are catching those out. But think about staying current. The support for the versions, it's only going to be 18 months. So think about planning in perhaps your quiet time of year. A quick upgrade, it will be a couple of days wonder. It will just be a quick flip from one version to the next. We've done them, and SaaS, it happens monthly, as I've already said. Well, thank you very much for listening to me for the last hour. I'm sorry this was purely PowerPoint, but upgrading process, I couldn't, there was so many variations I couldn't possibly run through it. It wouldn't have made sense to run through an example. There's so many different versions, older versions and so on, that it was a pretty dry subject, but I think it's important that you understand functionality, upgrade the functionality, then move the data, and then decide whether you want to migrate to SaaS. Think about BC14, that hybrid, that jumping off point between where you are now and the new model of customizations, and hopefully it won't scare you too much. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and look forward to talking to you. Always available if if you have individual questions. Upgrading is a very individual topic. There's no universal thing that's right for every company. So let's talk to you on a one-for-one basis. You've got my email, you've got my contact details. Give me a shout. Love to help you out.